Jeffery Deaver.
Thank you, Bill and Joe, and friends of the Georgia Center for the book. The interrogation began like any other. Kathryn Dance entered the jailhouse interview room and found the 43-year-old man sitting at a metal table, shackled, looking at her closely. Subjects always did this, of course, though never with such astonishing eyes. Their color was a blue unlike sky or ocean or famous gems. "Good morning," she said, sitting down across from him. "And to you," replied Daniel Pell, a man serving a life sentence for 8 years ago, knifing to death 4 members of a family for reasons he'd never shared. His voice was soft. A slight smile on his bearded face, the small, sinewy man sat back, relaxed. His head, covered with long gray-black hair, was cocked to the side. While most jailhouse interrogations were accompanied by a jingling sound of handcuff chains as subjects tried to prove their innocence with broad, predictable gestures, Daniel Pell sat perfectly still. To Dance, a specialist in interrogation and kinesics, body language, Pell's demeanor and posture suggested caution, but also confidence and, curiously, amusement. Pell continues his examination. First, he took in Dance's own eyes, a green complementary to his blue and framed by square black-rimmed glasses. He then regarded her French-braided, dark blonde hair, the black jacket, and beneath it the thick, unrevealing white blouse. He noted, too, the empty holster on her hip. He was meticulous and in no hurry. Interviewers and an interviewee share mutual curiosity. She told her students in her interrogation seminars, "They're studying you as hard as you're studying them, usually even harder because they have more to lose." Pell turned around and glanced at the mirror, behind which a video camera was humming away merrily. "You folks really think that that's there so we can fix up our hair?" Mirrors were not placed in interrogation rooms to hide cameras and witnesses. There are far better high-tech ways to do that. But because people are less inclined to lie when they can see themselves. Dance gave a faint smile. "And you understand, Daniel, that you can withdraw from this interview at any time and that you have the right to an attorney." "Ha!" he said. "I know more criminal procedure than the entire graduating class of Hastings Law rolled up into one," which is a pretty funny image when you think about it. The previous week, Daniel Pell's name had come up in connection with a murder a decade ago. A rich farmer named Robert Heron had been bludgeoned to death. Evidence, a wallet and a hammer, linking Daniel Pell to Heron's death, had just been found based on what a former cellmate of Pell's had shared with the police, trying to get a parole deal for himself. The Monterey County prosecutor decided to present a case against Pell to the grand jury in Salinas and asked California Bureau of Investigation investigator Kathryn Dance to interview him in hopes of a confession. Well, this is now what Kathryn tried for, asking, "Tell me, Daniel, how long did you live in the Monterey area?" He seemed surprised that she didn't immediately begin to browbeat. "Well, a few years." "Where?" In Seaside. This was a town of about 30,000 people north of Monterey on Highway 1, populated mostly by young working families and retirees. He looked her over and said, "You got more for your hard-earned money there." A wink. "More than in your fancy Carmel." His eyes alighted quickly on her face. His grammar and syntax were good, she noted, ignoring the fishing expedition for information about her residence. Dance continued to ask about his life in Seaside and in prison, observing him the whole while. How he behaved when she asked the questions and how he behaved when he answered took most of her attention. She wasn't doing this to get information about him, of course. She'd done her homework and knew the answers to everything she asked. But instead, she was establishing his baseline behavior. The baseline is a catalog of those behaviors exhibited when a subject is telling the truth. This is the standard the interrogator will compare later with the subject's behavior when he might have a reason to lie. Any deviation between the two suggests deception. Well, finally, Kathryn Dance had a good profile of the truthful Daniel Pell and moved to the crux of her mission here in this modern, sterile courthouse on a foggy morning in June. Well, now, Daniel, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Robert Herron. How did you meet him? Well, you're assuming I did, but no, never met him in my life. I swear. This last sentence, she noted, it was a deception flag, though his body language wasn't giving off signals that suggested he was lying. It's curious. She said to him, but you told your cellmate that you wanted him to go to the well and find the hammer and wallet after you'd been released and destroy them. Oh, no. That's what he told the warden. I didn't say that at all. You know, I got this whole thing figured out. Here's what happened. Somebody stole that hammer of mine, killed Herron with it, and planted it to blame me. They wore gloves, you know. Those rubber ones, everybody in CSI wears those rubber gloves. Well, but if he wanted to do that, Dance pointed out, wouldn't the killer just call the police 10 years ago and tell them where the hammer was? Why wait till now? Well, being smart, I'll bet. Better to bide his time than spring the trap, you know? Well, but she pointed out another contradiction. Why would the real killer call your cellmate about the evidence? Why not just call the police directly? A hesitation. He was thinking hard. Then he gave a laugh. Oh, I know, because they're involved too. That's it. The police, sure. I got it. The cops realize the Herron case hasn't been solved. There's all kinds of press about it, and they want to blame somebody. Well, why not me? They've already got me in jail. They don't have to do any work. I'm the one they've already got. Yeah, that's it. I'll bet the cops planted that hammer themselves. Well, rather than contradicting him, Kathryn Dance said, well, okay, Daniel, let's work with this a little. There are two different things you're saying that I can see. First, somebody stole your hammer before Herron was killed, murdered him with it, and now, all this time later, dimes you out, turns you in. But your second version is that the police got your hammer after Herron was killed by someone else altogether and planted it in that well to blame you. Well, those are contradictory. It's either one or the other. Which one do you think it is? Pell thought for a few seconds. He said, okay, I'll go with number 2. That's it. The police. It's a setup. I'm sure that's what happened. They've always been after me. She looked him in the eyes, green on blue, and still she nodded agreeably. Well, okay, Daniel, let's consider that, why don't we? First, I'm curious, where would the police have gotten that hammer? Evidence is accounted for real closely. You know, I'd go for a more credible scenario. You think somebody else blamed you? You might want to think about this. That hammer was stolen recently. Where could somebody have found a hammer of yours in the last month, last couple of weeks? Do you have any property in the state, any houses? No, I don't. Well, how about any relatives or friends who might have had some tools of yours? Not really, which wasn't an answer to a yes or no question at all. It was even slipperier than I don't recall. Dance noted, too, that Pell had put his hands, tipped with long, clean nails, on the table at the word relatives. This was a deviation from his baseline behavior. It didn't mean he was lying necessarily, but he was feeling stress. All right, Daniel, she said, agreeable still. Let's think about the wallet they found. We'll put the hammer aside for a second. Where could that wallet have come from? The wallet with the initials R.H., Robert Herron, stamped on it. Well, here's a thought. You think the cops are behind it? Well, what if it's not Robert Herron's wallet at all? What if this rogue cop we're talking about just bought any wallet, had R.H. stamped in the leather, and then hid it and the hammer in the well? It could have been last month or last week. What do you think about that, Daniel? At this, Pell lowered his head. She couldn't see his eyes, and he said nothing. Well, it was unfolding just as she'd planned. Dance had forced him to pick the more credible of two explanations for his innocence and proceeded to prove that it wasn't credible at all. No sane jury would possibly believe that the police had fabricated the evidence and stolen tools from a house hundreds of miles away from the crime scene. Pell was now realizing the mistake he'd made. She'd backed him into a corner. The trap was about to close. Checkmate. Her heart thumped a bit, and she was thinking that the next words out of his mouth might very well be to ask about a plea bargain. Oh, but Kathryn Dance was wrong. His eyes snapped open and bored into hers with pure malevolence. He lunged forward as far as he could. Only the chains hooked to the metal chair, grounded with bolts to the tile floor, stopped him from sinking his teeth into her throat. She jerked back, gasping, "God damn you! Oh, I get it now. Oh, I see the whole thing. Sure, you're part of it too. Yeah, Kathryn Dance. Blame Daniel Pell. It's always my fault. I'm the easy target. And you come in here sounding like a friend, asking me just a few questions. Oh, you're just like the rest of them." Her heart was pounding furiously now, and she was afraid. But she noted quickly that the restraints were secure, and he couldn't reach her. She turned to the mirror, behind which the officer manning the video camera was surely rising to his feet right now to help her. But she shook her head his way. It was important to know where this was going. But then suddenly, Pell's fury was replaced with a cold calm. He sat back, caught his breath, and looked her over again. "You're in your 30s, Officer Dance. You're somewhat pretty. You seem straight to me. So I guarantee there's a man in your life, or has been." "Well, Daniel," she tried to calm, "if you don't like my theory, let's come up with another one about what really happened with Robert Heron." As if she hadn't spoken, he continued, "And you've got children, right?" "Sure you do. I can see that." "Tell me about them. Tell me about the little ones. Close in age and not too old, I'll bet." This unnerved her. She thought instantly of her daughter and son, Maggie and Wes. But she struggled not to react. "He doesn't know I have children. Of course, he can't. But he acts as if he's certain. Was there something about my behavior he noted? Has he been reading my body language?" "Listen to me, Daniel," she said smoothly. "An outburst isn't going to help anything. I've got friends on the outside, you know. They owe me. Oh, they'd love to come visit. Hang with your husband and your children. Yeah, it's a tough life being a cop, isn't it? The little ones spend a lot of time alone, don't they? I'll bet they'd love somebody to play with." Dance returned his gaze, never flinching. She said, "Could you tell me more about your relationship with your former cellmate?" "Oh, yes, I could, but I won't." His emotionless words mocked her, suggesting that for a professional interrogator, she'd phrased her question carelessly. In a soft voice, he added, "I think it's time for me to go back to my cell." Well, this is the opening of my latest thriller from Simon & Schuster. Clearly not a thank you. Clearly not a children's story. This introduces a new series heroine, Kathryn Dance, who, as you gathered, is a kinesics expert, kinesics being body language, but also an interrogator and expert interviewer as well. She is the character, as you heard earlier, who was introduced originally in The Cold Moon and played a rather tangential but important part in tracking down the watchmaker, a villain that Lincoln Rhyme was up against. In the Sleeping Doll begins with the scene we saw, Kathryn interviewing Daniel Pell. I love my villains. Villains are so great. And a word of advice, if anyone out there is in the business world, and I assume many of you are, and you have anything to do with a writer, make sure you show up on time for those meetings and you don't do anything bad, because if you do, you're going to end up dead in the next book. I had a plumber once. Oh, the poor guy never recovered from what I did to him because he missed a meeting. I stayed home from work and he missed a meeting, and it was not pleasant. Well, Daniel Pell is my villain. Who here knows who? Some of you are going to laugh at this question, but there's a reason for it. Who here knows who Charles Manson was? Okay, but you would be surprised. You know, you get to a certain age. I was born in 1950, and I lived through the 60s, and that was really the essential crime of the 1960s. I thought, if we're not going to talk about Washington politics. And Manson, for those of you who are not familiar with him, was a cult leader extremely charismatic and manipulative man, someone whose career we all of that era followed closely. And I found myself very interested in how he could get people to do things against their will. In the Charles Manson killings, the actress Sharon Tate, pregnant, many months pregnant, and other innocent people were slaughtered at the behest of Charles Manson, although he did not participate in that killing. He is now serving time for the murder because on conspiracy theories and for other killings, but he essentially talked people into committing the crime for him. Well, I was always obsessed with that idea. I thought it was fascinating. How could someone talk other people who had a history of petty crimes, but nothing violent like that, into committing violent murder? And as often happens in this writing business, we put the ideas there and let them bake, and then they come out at a certain point. And I figured, well, it was time to write a book about Daniel Pell. I'm giving a bit away, but if you've read the back jacket or seen the ads, you do know that Daniel Pell escapes following this interview, and Kathryn Dance is the one who is elected to track him down. As in all of my books, there is a cat and mouse chase going on. The villain, by rights, an escapee from a maximum security prison, ought to be headed off to a foreign country, Mexico or Canada, or get out of town, but he doesn't. He stays in the Monterey Bay area where the book is set and continues the carnage that he started 10 years ago. Why? Kathryn Dance has to find out. As in all of my books, there is a lot of surprise, many twists and turns. There's a surprise ending, then a surprise ending, and after that there's a surprise ending. I do like my twists, I have to say. And all is not quite what it seems to be, but if I told you much more, you wouldn't buy the book, and that's kind of what you're here for, and frankly what I'm here for as well. A question I get, because people are aware of the popularity of Lincoln Rhyme, who sells millions and millions of copies in 150 countries around the world, translated into 35 languages. Why is Kathryn here? Who needs her? Well, she's here because of you guys. I sometimes hear authors say, and let's see if I can put enough pretension into my voice to say this, I write for myself. No, you don't. Give me a break. If you write a diary, yeah, you write for yourself. If you write a memoir, well, you write for Oprah, but that's a different story. Okay, if you write a grocery list or you write a laundry list, well, that's for yourself. But no, if you write a book or poetry or short stories, you write for an audience. Now, you may choose to write for a small audience. You may write some kind of very esoteric experimental fiction, but you are still writing for your audience. That's what this is all about. It's the nature of writing. It's called communication for a reason. We are communing with people. And I myself am very, very, very interested in this communication process and making sure that I do what you want. It's self-interest to some extent because I want to be a full-time writer, but I also feel a great responsibility to you guys because you spend a huge amount of money on books, because I guarantee this book, The Sleeping Doll, is not the only book you're buying this year. I can deduce that. This is not a Houdini kind of thing. You spend a lot of money on books, and you spend a lot of time, and actually time is more valuable than money nowadays. So I listen a lot to what you want. I call it the liver-flavored toothpaste analogy. Who here brushed their teeth this morning? Some people aren't raising their... Now, you have to do that. Cavities are very bad. Was it mint or cinnamon or that disgusting Tom stuff, which is baking soda? But it still is good for you. I understand that. But it wasn't liver-flavored, was it? It wasn't chicken-flavored. It wasn't beet-flavored. No, why? Because there's no market for liver or chicken or beef-flavored toothpaste. And Procter & Gamble figured this out. You know, it's not rocket science. If I write a book, I write a book that is mint-flavored toothpaste. It's a book you're going to want. I try really hard to give you something that's enjoyable for you. So what the hell is he talking about, you're thinking? Well, I listen to your feedback, and you like Lincoln Rhyme, but I read almost all of my fan mail, and there's something else you folks like, given the baseline of a typical Deaver book, which is this. Surprises, twists and turns, and a bit of esoterica. For instance, in The Vanished Man, I wrote about the history of illusion and magic, the stone monkey, Asian culture, and illegal immigration, the cold moon, watchmaking. Always elements about forensic science and police procedure, which are fascinating, and we love that. So that's the template of a Deaver book. Now, if you set that book in a relentless, hard-boiled atmosphere in New York City, kind of a curmudgeonly character, we get a Lincoln Rhyme book with a lot of science, forensic science. And that's all interesting, and obviously, as I said, the books sell very well. But you guys like other things too. For instance, you like what I call, affectionately, the soap opera stuff. And that is the human relationship issues that have nothing to do with solving the crime. And in fact, most of us have had more issues and conflict and experience with human relationships than we have with serial killing, right? No hands raised here. And if you do, not a problem. Fine. This is America. Everybody's free to pursue whatever hobbies they want. But I happen to enjoy, as you do too, the human relationship issues with lovers, spouses, families, children, parents, co-workers, and things like that. Well, that's an important aspect of the book that in Lincoln Rhyme, we don't have a lot of time for. I was on book tour once, and I don't think we have a very young audience here, so I can say this. I can't always say it. A young woman walked up to me and said, "Oh, Mr. Deaver, I had a question. I didn't want to ask it in front of everyone else." She was getting her book signed. And she said, "What about sex?" And I said, "I don't have time now. I'm sorry." And actually, to be honest, I blushed more than she did. But what she meant, of course, was there's no romance in my books. A little bit with Lincoln and Amelia, they are partners. But who's got time? 24 hours to solve find a serial killer? We don't have time for that. And believe me, that would be the epitome of gratuitous sex. So there's none of that in there. But do we like to read about those relationships? Of course we do. We don't necessarily like a book that we pick up at 10 o'clock at night and cannot put down until 4 in the morning. Sometimes we like to spend a little time with the characters, and I will never write a slow-paced book, I hope. If I do, I've stumbled. But we like a book that may take place over, as The Sleeping Doll does, over a week, where it's not quite so relentless. We can be a little more leisurely about it. A longer book. This is the longest book I've written. And we have another thing that's very popular that you guys like is series characters. I'm not writing one-off books anymore. We call them one-offs or standalone books because you like to spend time with characters you know and love that keep coming back. So my intent is to write a Lincoln Rhyme book and then a Kathryn Dance book, then a Lincoln Rhyme book and a Kathryn Dance book. So I have you to thank for Kathryn because she is the embodiment of the other type of book, a bit slower, with more personal relationship issues in it. Kathryn is a young widow with 2 young children, as you gathered. Her parents live in the area. Her mother gives her all kind of grief, believe it or not. Mothers do that from time to time. And nonetheless, the story has many twists and turns and surprises in it. So I think it will satisfy the typical Deaver book, and yet it will introduce kind of a different atmosphere and tone. Unlike the hard-edged New York City mean streets, this is set in Northern California, the antithesis of that. A fascinating area. When I was telling my British editor about the book, I said, well, it's set in Monterey, and she has a brother who lives in California, and she said, oh, Monterey and Carmel, it's beautiful there, but I've been there a number of times. Do you think there's enough crime to support a series? And I said, there will be when I get through with it. So I thank you for helping me with Kathryn. I'm going to read another short passage here. This little setup. The sleeping doll refers to a young girl who survived the murders 8 years ago. She was in bed asleep, 8 years old, in bed asleep in her family's house with kind of covered up with her toys and stuffed animals. So Pell did not see her, killed the rest of her family, but she survived. Hence, the press dubbed her the sleeping doll. And Kathryn cannot find Pell anywhere, cannot find him. He's on the Monterey Peninsula. He's still killing, cannot find him. And she finally tracks down the girl who has a new identity and convinces her to tell her the story about what happened back then, in the hopes that this will provide some clue. And this is the beginning of the interview between the two of them. In her seminars on interrogation, Kathryn Dance told the story of the city slicker stopping in a small town to ask a farmer directions. The stranger looks at the dog sitting at the man's feet and smiles and says, "Your dog bite?" The farmer says no, and when the stranger bends down to pet him, the dog bites him. The man jumps back and angrily says, "You said your dog didn't bite." The farmer replies, "Mine doesn't. This here's not my dog." The art of interrogating isn't only about analyzing the subject's answers, it's about asking the right questions. The facts about the murders 8 years ago and every moment after that had been documented, thoroughly documented by the police and by reporters. So Kathryn Dance decided to inquire about the one period of time that no one had apparently ever asked about, before the murders. "Teresa, I want to ask you about what happened earlier." "Like earlier?" the girl said. Sure, earlier that day." The girl frowned. "Oh, I don't remember much about it. I mean, what happened that night, like it kind of shoved everything else away." "Well, give it a try. Think back. It was May. I know that. You were in school then, right?" "Yeah." "What day of the week was it?" It was Friday." "Oh, you remember that pretty fast." "Oh, yeah, because a lot of Fridays Dad would take us kids places. That day we were going to the carnival rides in Santa Cruz on the boardwalk. Only everything got messed up because I got sick." "Oh, the plans changed, huh?" "Yeah, we were like on our way, but..." The girl looked down. "I got sick in the car. So we turned around and went home." "Oh, that's too bad. What did you have? A cold?" "Stomach flu." Teresa winced and touched her tummy. "Oh, I just hate that," Kathryn Dance said. "And you got back home about when?" 5:30 maybe? "And you went straight to bed?" "Yeah, that's right. I went straight to bed." She looked out the window at a gnarled tree outside Dance's window. At this point, Kathryn Dance paused. She realized she had a decision to make, an important one, because there was no doubt that Teresa Croyton was being deceptive. When she'd been making casual conversation earlier, the girl's kinesic behavior was relaxed and open, though she obviously was experiencing general stress. Anybody who's talking to a police officer experiences that. But as soon as she started talking about the trip to Santa Cruz, she displayed hesitations of speech. She covered parts of her face and looked out the window. Trying to appear calm and casual, nonetheless, she revealed the stress she was experiencing by bobbing her foot. Dance sensed deception stress patterns and that the girl was in the denial response state. She didn't want to think about what was causing her to lie. "Teresa, something troubling happened on that drive, didn't it?" "Well, yeah, I got sick." No, something else." "Troubling? No, really, I swear." "Oh, a triple play here. 2 denial flag expressions along with answering a question with a question." And now the girl's face was flushed and the foot bobbed again, a cluster of stressed responses. "Well, let's talk about it a little bit. Let's talk about it. You've left Carmel. You're driving to Santa Cruz. You're not feeling well. And then you go home. Other than being sick, what about that drive was bothering you? I think there was something." "Oh, I don't know. I can't remember." That sentence, of course, usually means I remember perfectly well, but I don't want to think about it. The memory is just too painful. "Well, you're driving along and, well, I Teresa began, then she fell silent, and then lowered her head to her hands and broke into tears, a torrent, accompanied by the soundtrack of breathless sobbing. "Teresa!" Dance rose and handed her a wad of tissues as the girl cried hard. Finally, she said, oh, Agent Dance, I've wanted to tell somebody. I wanted to tell somebody for so long, but I just couldn't. Not the counselors or my friends or the therapists or my aunt or uncle. She stopped talking again, more sobbing. Her chest was collapsed, chin down, hands on her hips, when not mopping her face. The textbook kinesic signs that Teresa Croyton had moved beyond the denial stage into the acceptance of emotional response. The terrible burden of what she'd been living with, whatever it was possibly finally going to come out. Finally, she said, oh, it's my fault. It's my fault they're all dead. Now she pressed her head back against the couch. Her face was red. Tendons rose. Tears stained the front of her blouse. Brenda and Steve and Mom and Dad, they're dead all because of me. Because you got sick? No, because I pretended to get sick. Tell me, Teresa. I didn't want to go to the boardwalk. I couldn't stand going. I hated it. All I could think of was to pretend to be sick. I remembered about these models who got sick because they don't want to get fat. They put their fingers down their throat. When we were in the car on the way to the highway, I did that when nobody was looking. I said I had the flu, and everybody was mad at me, and we had to go home. But I didn't want to be there. So that was it. The poor girl was convinced that it was her fault her family had been slaughtered because of the lie she told. She'd lived with this terrible burden for years. Well, one truth had been excavated, but at least one more now remained. And Kathryn Dance was determined to unearth it as well. The important one. The one that might hold the clue as to where Daniel Pell was. Okay, tell me, Teresa. You have to tell me. Why didn't you want to go to the pier? Why? I just didn't. I didn't want to. I just didn't. Please, Teresa, tell me. The girl took a deep breath. She looked up and said, Okay, because, well, I'm a suspense writer, and I'm kind of psychologically programmed to end on a suspenseful note. Well, and in fact, now if we have a few more minutes, and I think we do, I'm going to end on a terrifying note, because as you heard earlier, I not only write books, I write poems. And if you thought my books are scary, wait till I read you one of my poems. Now, I firmly believe in Ernest Hemingway's dictum that a novelist, a writer of genre fiction at least, adventure novels or thriller novels, if he or she wants to send a message, should go to Western Union. Now those of you who don't know what Western Union is, we can substitute, send an email for it. But the political positions have no point in novels. And I believe in that. If you want to, you have a political agenda, and we should all have political agendas. We should all be involved, social, political, philosophical issues. But that doesn't belong in our novels. The novels are to tell stories. But there are other forms for that. And there is an issue that I feel strongly about, and I know you do too, because you're here tonight. And I'm now going to read a poem that expresses my political opinion about something. And I call it The Death of Reading. I've got what I think is the very best job. I have no commute. I can dress like a slob. I get paid to make up things. Isn't that neat? Just like at the White House in 10 Downing Street. Only in my case, there's no dereliction. In fact, it's expected when you're writing fiction. So imagine my horror, imagine my fear, when I read in the press that the end was near. Oh, not Armageddon or crazed terrorists. No, the demise of reading was the article's gist. Teachers and parents and critics all share it, that like Monty Python's proverbial parrot, reading is dead, deceased, pushing up daisies. Readers are growing increasingly lazy, lured by the siren of electronic toys that fill up our lives with meaningless noise, from Palm Pilots, blogs, and big-screen TVs, and mobile phones smarter than I'll ever be. We pray at the altar of our brand-new God, who's powerful and wise, and whose name is iPod. Well, so if people are no longer going to read, therefore writers are something that nobody needs. This made my heart pound, and it made my hands shake, and I considered what other jobs I might take. But looking for work to find something new, I decided that all I could possibly do involved making lattes and learning to say, "Let me tell you about our specials today." So before heading off to my overpriced shrink, I decided it might be best to rethink these terrible rumors that we'd all heard about the demise of the written word. Now, if truly readers are dying off fast, that suggests there were masses of them in the past. But I can hardly imagine when that might have been. Who had, after all, any time to read when you were fighting off lions with your bare hands and wandering nomadic across desert sands? True, reading wasn't past everyone's reach, but stone tablets were not popular reads at the beach. In ancient Rome, yes, people read more, but not mass-market scrolls from their local drugstore. In Latin, my God, once your lessons were done, your lifespan was over. You'd been murdered by Huns. In medieval times, there was always the hope that you might learn to read if you worked for the Pope, or you were a royal or other elite, which left most of Europe up illiterate creek. Then Gutenberg invented movable letters, making access to books a little bit better, though another small problem existed, of course, that the smallest of books cost more than your horse. Then Victoria's Queen and tuppence novels arrive, and everywhere interest in reading thrives. But despite what the doomsayers might be wishing, the numbers show Dickens sold far less than Grisham. Sorry, that rhyme was really tough. So, if the past hardly proves what the critics say, well, how about the state of reading today? To find out if no one reads anymore, I went to, where else? My local bookstore, which I couldn't help notice was jammed to the gills, and virtually every shelf was filled with books on more subjects than I knew existed, and dozens of posters on which were listed upcoming visits by writers galore, who'd read to their fans right there in the store. From romances, children's, true crimes about killers, and self-help and travel, thrillers. And then I recalled last summer when I was downtown doing some shopping, just strolling around, I was nearly killed in a massive stampede of youngsters, no less, in desperate need to purchase their latest heart desire. No batteries required, no software, no wires. A book's what they'd sought, and they'd waited all day. Who's this Harry Potter guy anyway? Last year, tabloid newspapers did what they do best. Not running pictures of movie stars' chests or stories of scandals that have Washington shook. No, the headlines all had to do with a book, whether Dan Brown had borrowed ideas sowed by other authors in the Da Vinci Code, which I might add in a jealous aside has sold 100 million copies worldwide. No, I feel that reading's demise must be like the government's proof of WMDs or the records of most of our candidates. One word comes to mind, and it's overinflate. So forgive me the ghosts of Lake Windermere and all other poets we hold so dear, not to mention the late and the great Dr. Seuss, for my rhyming transgressions and my rhythmic abuse. But I simply could not sit back and ignore this lie that nobody reads anymore. And I'll share one more clue that there's nothing to fear. Why, just look around at our gathering here. We could be at work, at movies and bars, or watching Jack Bauer and Dancing with Stars. But we've managed to get here, by hook or by crook, for something immortal, our love of the book. Thank you. Thank you. This is something you'll never hear another author say. Well, you'll never hear an author say, including myself, except in this one case. That's free if you want it. You can go to my website and download it and give it away to your friends, especially if you're involved in libraries or schools. Give it to your children for their teachers or whatever, because I think it's an important issue, and we have to remember that books will be with us forever. Well, I'd be happy to take a few questions now. I don't want to keep you too late on this beautiful night before the hot weather descends. But if you do have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. I'll call on you. Yes. Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. The question basically has to do with how I write a book, because I do have very intricate plots, and everything comes together at the end, and each plot and subplot has a surprise of some sort. There's a payoff. And I do that by outlining the book, and I spend 8 months outlining each book. I spend a year writing the book, creating the whole book. 8 months of that is the outlining process. And a lot of false starts, and sometimes I'll get a month into it and realize this is not a book that could or should be written. But rather do it at that stage than sit down and produce 700 pages of text and then realize that it's not right to do. So I do which I did early in my career, but then I learned the outline process, and I spend that much time. The Sleeping Doll was about 150-page outline. Every character, I know where every character is introduced, where all the clues are, where the payoffs are, when the characters leave the book, either horizontal or vertical. And I spend most of the time on the ending, because the ending is the most important part of a thriller, most important part of any book, I feel. And so that takes a lot of choreography. And then, when that's done, that's the easy part. Then I can just sit down and write the book, and I change maybe 5% from the outline. I tend to kill too many people. It's easy in the outline to kill people, but when you actually kill somebody in the text, you got to have a crime scene. You got to put on your latex gloves, the jumpsuit, go search it, put the evidence on a chart. So I just get lazy, and 3 victims is enough anyway. You don't really need more than that. Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah, well, the question was about some authors who've been doing it for a long time, and I've been doing this for 20 years now, and many of us in the thriller field have. And some of the books, I frankly don't read Grisham. I haven't read him for many years, so I can't speak to him. But, realistically, some books in long series, the latest ones maybe don't stand up to the early ones. And I'm fortunate in that I have plenty of ideas, and I write a very specific kind of book. I don't write, you're not going to get the, what is it, like Avoiding Christmas or, Happy Day at the Beach, holding hands you may, but people are going to be dead at the end of the first chapter, so, in one of my books. But I have plenty of ideas, and I also think it's very, very important to stay hungry. Authors get to a certain point, and it's a tough job. It's kind of a lonely job, and it's physically demanding. I'm on tour for 3 months out of the year. I will not be home for any extended period of time until September. I'm doing U.S., Europe, and the Far East on book tour. And you do want to coast a little bit, but the thing is, there are a lot of people to take your place out there. You got a lot of options, a lot of really good authors. So I think we have to stay hungry, and I have such great affection for you readers. You let me do what I love doing, writing books. So I'm going to make sure I keep reinventing it. That's where Kathryn Dance came from. As I say, you guys you like the other aspects of the story, so I'm going to give you that. You're not going to get alien dogs, coming from outer space and in a Harry Potter context for me. You're going to get the same solid kind of book you're going to get, which, won't transcend, it won't be a huge Da Vinci Code bestseller, but it doesn't need to be. My core audience, a couple million readers around the world, we have a great relationship. Yes.
This isn't a question, but I'd like to pay you a compliment. You write really fine dialogue, which very few mystery writers do.
Oh, thank you.
In fact, only Robert Parker.
Robert Parker, yeah, the Spencer books, yeah.
That's the greatest compliment
Oh, thank you. I'll repeat this, even though you may have heard it. The charming lady said I write very good dialogue, and I have to say that's important because anything that separates the reader from the experience of the book is bad. Anything that draws you in is good. And when was the last time, for instance, you turned to your partner and said, "Oh, darling, I'm famished. Shall we dine?" So, what do you want, pizza or Chinese tonight? And that's the way people really talk. And then you can relate to the characters much better. Yes, sir.
There's no resemblance between you and him. But what do you think of a writing factory like James Patterson?
Patterson. Well, I'm another one of these very. And do you know James Patterson's story? He writes at least one series himself, and then co-writes various things. I happen. He does a lot of books. And there's a woman writer too. Is it Nora Roberts? J.D. Robb also. I believe she writes everything herself. She tires me out just looking at her list. But I'm very lucky because I like writing. Two things about me. One, I like writing. It's enjoyable. It's a challenge. It keeps my mind fresh. It can be frustrating at times, but it's life. What isn't frustrating at times? So I happen to enjoy it very much, and I also don't play well with others. So the idea of giving an idea of mine to somebody else is anathema. I could not do it. But James does. He does what I was saying earlier. He gives people something they enjoy, and obviously, if his sales are what they are, which is astronomical, he's got to be doing something right for the audience. But it's not something I would have any interest in whatsoever. It misses the personal relationship. Sorry, yeah.
Do you have any particular writers that you enjoy reading?
Yeah, I do. As a matter of fact, I have of the living ones. I like a lot of the old crime fiction, people no longer with us. But the living writers, I like Thomas Harris, a local boy, and John le Carré is probably my favorite author, and a fellow who's coming, I think, this week, Michael Connelly. Yeah, he's a good friend of mine. I think so. Yeah, I don't know if he's coming to this event, but I think he'll be in the area. He's a good friend of mine and a great writer. And Michael Connelly, too. John Connelly, an Irish writer who's a great guy. So, yes, sir.
It seems that the United States has more serial killers. Professional serial killers than any other country. In your research, is there anything that gives you any insight into whether or not our society or anything has promotes this sort of thing?
Yeah, the question was, the U.S. appears to have more serial killers than any other country, and in fact, we don't. And this is curious. We have more fiction, and we have more media about serial killers. But a serial killer, definition in VICAP, that's the Violent Crime Apprehension Program at the FBI, and also the antisocial behavior patterns of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association that defines what type of condition this is, what type of criminal personality this is. It's a very specific diagnosis, and it is someone who tends to be a young male, young between, say, 18 and 35, who kills primarily for lust or out of sexual frustration, and of course, we know the Ted Bundy, for instance, the classic one, or Jeffrey Dahmer, the fellow here, Wayne. What was the name again? Right, Wayne Williams, or Jeffrey Dahmer. These are very, very specific diagnoses. We see a lot of fiction and a lot of news stories about multiple killers. But that's something very different than the serial killer. And what is branded a serial killer in the press or in fiction is miscorrectly diagnosed. Now, operating in any given geographic area of roughly, say, 5 to 50 million people, there is generally a serial killer, and that's true throughout the world. The number one winner for the serial killer prize was a Russian who killed hundreds and hundreds of people and was only unapprehended because of the sloppy police work under the Soviet regime. There is in Italy, where I will be in Tuscany in about 3 weeks, a friend of mine, get this, is on the Italian police force. It's the Tuscan police force based in Florence, and he is head of the serial killer department. We don't even have a serial killer department anywhere. There's the behavioral sciences department in the FBI, but they study everybody. They have in Florence, not just in Florence, but in the province of Tuscany in Italy, they have such a serious problem there that they have 3 police officers devoted full time to tracking down the serial killers. So the country's a little safer than you thought now, maybe. Yes, sir. It's curious about the publishing business. Either nobody wants it or everybody wants it. And for a long time, nobody wants anything you've ever done. My first book was rejected over and over and over again for completely contradictory reasons. Too much characterization, not enough characterization. Too much violence, not enough violence. I didn't get any answer. What it meant was those editors didn't like the book, and they were trying to come up with something that we would be able to take to the bank. And that didn't mean if I put less violence in and sent it back, they would accept it because there'd be something else they didn't like. I think that was the biggest problem. And I finally learned just to ignore that, write the kind of book that I thought was in harmony with the books that I enjoyed reading, the thrillers at the time, for instance, and just keep submitting it over and over and over again. And then do what I did when I sold my first book, completely rejected, and then sold 2 more, sent my first rejected book back to the same company that had rejected it, and they published it. Different editor. Same book. Guy who, in fairness, it was a different editor. But for whatever reason, who knows? That one, they seem to like it at that point. So maybe take one more, could we do? Okay. Oh, okay, I'll take yours. Sorry. You know what? I'll be outside signing books, and you can always chat me up there. So, yes, ma'am.
In the movie Bone Collector, your twists were missed at the end of this movie, and how was that?
That's a good question. I really don't know. Yeah. Whenever I hear an author say that, they took my baby, they destroyed my child, it was terrible, and I always say, did you send the check back? And you know what? Nobody ever did. And I think the reason for that is this. I set up my twists very carefully, and they would have translated into the movie very well. But the writer chose not to do that for some reason. I gave them my input, but they disregarded it. And that's okay. It's their movie. It's my book, their movie. But I think the ultimate answer to your question is a very significant one, and that is that the emotional responses on the part of an audience in a theater or at home now, watching a big screen TV, are different from the responses in reading a book. And you can legitimately scare the audience with music, with sudden cuts in the film, with mood and atmosphere, and with items that just don't work in the book, and that makes a legitimate film. Just as in the movie, if I wrote, the heroine ran out of the house where the killer was, and then she said, I have to go back inside the house for some reason. And she walks back inside the house, and then I were to write, and a black cat jumped out and scared her. Well, you read that and say, so? But in a movie that scares you. And it's a legitimate convention in a movie. So, I love films, very influenced by them, but really apples and oranges. Well, thank you all for coming out tonight. Always a pleasure to be here. And we're going to be outside. Joe will be outside. Okay, so we'll be outside signing books, and I'll be there. I'll sign, as I say, all of them that I wrote. Grisham's on his own. And whose I am. Well, some people are no longer going to read. Therefore, the writers, some are sitting in the nobody. I made this hard my hand, my baby, and I said, what other job